Start the record. So, welcome. Today's webinar, as you would have seen when you signed up, is all going to be on mastering influence, which I'm really excited to do. Like I said, I haven't done a webinar that focuses on this really before, but it's something that I've seen is coming up a lot with clients, with groups, just across the board. And so I hoped and thought that it would make really interesting discussion. Like I said, this should be about 45 minutes, depending on how waffly I'm feeling this evening. So there should be time for questions right at the end, but feel free to drop some in the chat as you go, and I'll check the chat right at the end. So for those who may not know me, my name is Molly. I'm a voice, accent, breath facilitator based in London. And I'm really passionate about helping people speak. I'm someone who doesn't believe that we learn how to speak properly in today's society. We learn a lot about what it is to read, what it is to write, what it is to send emails, what it is to sell. But I don't think we learn a lot about what it is to communicate and the true art of communication, especially after COVID, especially since so many of you are going to be working from home, you're going to be working virtually, which is such a privilege, but also it doesn't really allow you to practice what it is to own a space and what it is to own a room anymore, which means that when you actually go to own a room and own a space, your habits will just start to come in. And so actually sorry, I'm just admitting a few people there we go. So actually, the way that we show up every single day and we practice communication makes a massive difference. And so implementing techniques that, from my background or the acting background, hopefully will help with that. And I want to run you through some stuff today. So as the name would suggest, we're going to be talking about influence. And it's important for me, I suppose, to start with, what do I actually mean when I say influence? For me, I love this definition, and this is from researcher Albert Mehrabian, I believe the name is pronounced, and he says that communication as a communication model emphasizes that vocal elements such as tone, pitch, and rate significantly impact the perception of a message, suggesting that the power of voice in communication is crucial for conveying attitudes and emotions effectively. Now, the things that stick out for me in this are the fact that he's breaking down what we have in control about the voice, and also that influence is all about conveying a message that we have as people. I think usually when you're thinking about making an influence or making an impact on other people, it's really easy to focus on who you want to make the impact to. You want to focus on just the group. You want to focus on the person in front of you and go, this is what I want you to feel, and this is how you should feel in this moment. Whereas actually this definition reminds us that all of this work starts from the self. It starts from, what can we control? What can I control about my own body? What can I control about my own voice? What can I control about my own breath? And whatever I'm doing here is going to influence you. So much of communication and our habits is all about trying to get the person in front of us to listen, trying to get the person in front of us to feel something really desperately. And actually, the way we want to go about it is allowing ourselves to be affected and then invite people to be affected because we're affected. So all of that to say, when I talk about influence, I'm obviously talking about it in relation to a communication model. And I'm talking about it in terms of the self first, which correlates hugely with the topics we're going to be talking about for the next 40 minutes or so. We're going to be starting with the self, just like I was saying, because again, in actor training is different across the world, but in Europe and in London, the first year of a 3-year actor journey is all about what we'd call the self or the actor. That means that actors from a young age are figuring out what their habits are, figuring out what their breathing habits are, what their communication habits are, what their body habits are, before they even go into working with scene partners. They basically do a year of monologues or poems or things where they don't have to listen to anyone yet. And obviously you can get there without a year, but that's a huge starting point that I work with people on. We're then going to think about the material, and then then going to think about the witness or the audience in the communication, because every part of communication really relies on these three factors: the self, the material, and the witness or the witnesses. And you can see it's kind of like this triangle, because it kind of works like a triangle. If the self, or if the body is tired or it isn't on it that day, then that part of the triangle goes skew-if. Or if the material or the script isn't that strong, but the self and the witness are still keen, then it doesn't really matter. You're not really going to get that full equilateral triangle. And that's really what we're trying to get. We're trying to get a balance of all three of these topics in order to actually make an impact. Because in order to make an impact, and the biggest theme I think today as well, is all about being as intentional as possible. So when all of these are skew-if, like I said, it basically, I'm saying some of these at times will feel like they haven't been intentional enough to actually make a difference. So hopefully after today, you feel like you can put some intention in all three of these areas. So let's start with the self. Now, I'm going to use a colleague of mine called Caroline Goyder, who has a text called Gravitas that I'd really recommend for anyone interested in how to kind of bring this sort of work to their world. And she talks about our communication styles, and she talks about them as a scale. And she says on one end of the scale, you have credibility, and on the other end of the scale, you have approachability. And it's really important to note that this is a scale. So you can move up and down the scale, however, which way you like. However, like I said, we don't get too much practice with full communication or full oracy in day-to-day, which means that usually in terms of our habits, we're either leaning towards one side of the scale or the other side of the scale. And it's really important to just know which side of the scale you land on so that you can then branch out, or so that you can then expand your full range. So we're going to start with an exercise where I'd love it if you have a paper and pen in front of you, or you can literally just use the notes in your phone. And you're just going to answer A and B to the 10 questions that I'm going to have. Okay, so I'm going to put them up on the screen because I know some people don't like listening to my voice. No, I know some people don't like following vocal cues with questions. So if you'd rather read, then feel free to, but I'm going to put it on the screen just in case anyone would rather listen. So the first question you are answering, A or B, on a sheet of paper or on your phone, is day to day, or in scenarios where you feel like you really want to improve on being impactful or being influential, do you think you care more about being credible and respected, or likable and empathetic? And you don't need to think too deeply about it. Maybe it differs depending, maybe it's both. And if it's ever both, you can write both down. But in general, do you think you focus more on being credible and respected, or likable and empathetic? Question 2, are you someone who focuses more on precision and getting the job done? Or do you focus on the people and the relationship more? Third one, are you more analytical and objective? Or do you think you're more instinctive and emotional? Again, neither of these are inherently bad or good, by the way. It's just figuring out what our habit is. Number 4, do you consider yourself more formal in style, so your body's upright and you own the space? Or do you think you're more informal and chatty, your body's fluid and you allow others to take up more space? Fifth one, do you think you are more direct or indirect, B? Direct being that you tell people what needs to be said in a straightforward way. That's your natural instinct. Or maybe you speak more empathetically. Maybe you're trying to be more one than the other. Teresa, nice. Number 6, do you tend to influence more by push than pull? Or do you tend to influence more by pull than push? I love this question. If you are a manager or a leader of sorts, or even just you have a team that you're educating around you, are you more of a push person or pull person? Are you pulling them in with you, or are you pushing them to somewhere else? Number 7, do you think your voice tends to be lower? Or do you think your voice tends to be warmer and melodic? Number 8, do you focus more on the big picture, the goal, or do you focus more on the people on the way? Do you find yourself more comfortable in formal situations where you can play power? Or do you find yourself more comfortable in informal situations where you can build relationships? Again, maybe it's both, and you can write both as well. And the last one, and this is more in terms of your communication style. If you were looking at yourself, do you think you're more still and don't do much social smiling? You're comfortable with pauses? Or are you more warm and mobile? Lots of nodding and smiling to make other people feel comfortable. You fill a pause. So now you've done that, just have a look down, tot up, what is A, what is B, how many more A's, how many more B's? Maybe you'll be surprised, you probably won't, because most people are very aware of their habits. But if you had more A's, you might notice that you lean much more on the sort of credibility side of things. And if you had a lot more B's, you probably tend to sway to more the approachability side of things when in a conversation. And that's just important to know. I really promise you, neither is better than the other. It's about understanding what am I most comfortable in, so that when I'm in uncomfortable situations, such as a really important meeting or presentation, and I want to be intentional because I really need to make an impact, because I really need to actually make a difference through that, knowing where I'm at is going to help me broaden my range. Like, we want all of the scale. We don't just want a section of it. Caroline Goyder, who kind of came up with this really clever way of putting the model, says that right in the middle is where you find this notion of gravitas. And I agree with that to the extent where if you're going into a place where you don't know the audience, in the middle of this, so being flexible to go either side is a really good place to be. However, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail when we talk about the audience and witness on how I might change that and what I might encourage. So that's a bit about the self. That's understanding your cues. So once you've understood yourself, you might be thinking, yeah, I got it. I'm way too friendly. I need to help on, being bolder, being stricter, being more direct. We can then ask yourselves, okay, well, what can we actually control to get there? How can we affect the self, the body, everything like that? And here are 4 categories we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about exercises that help with gesture, exercises that help with alignment, exercises that help with tone, and exercises that help with some language. And to help us with this, I'm going to show you what I think is a fantastic speaker, Barack Obama. And we're going to have a watch, and I want you to write down or just note, what's the gesture like? What's the body like? What's the alignment like? What's the tone like? And I'm also curious to see, can you tell if there's any change in the clip that you're going to watch? So hopefully you're able to hear this when I start. Let me know if you have any issues. Let's go a little bit earlier than I planned. Actually, let's go from a bit earlier. Let's go from here.
Should Nazis be able to protest in Skokie? Well, that's a tough one, but we can figure this out. And that, I think, is how this is going to develop. I do believe that the platforms themselves are more than just common carriers like the phone company. They're not passive. There's always some content moderation taking place. And so, once that line has been crossed, it's perfectly reasonable for the broader society to say, well, we don't want to just leave that entirely to a private company. I think we need to at least know how you're making those decisions, what things you might be amplifying through your algorithm and what things you aren't. And, it may be that what you're doing isn't illegal, but we should at least be able to know how some of these decisions are made. I think it's going to be that kind of process that takes place. What I don't agree with is the large tech platforms suggesting somehow that we want to be treated entirely as...
Okay. I'm specifically going to play back a little section of that. And I want you to listen to the tone as you specifically watch his hands and just see what you notice.
For the broader society to say, well, we don't want to just leave that entirely to a private company. I think we need to at least know how you're making those decisions, what things you might be amplifying through your algorithm and what things you aren't. And, it may be that what you're doing isn't illegal, but we should at least be able to know how some of these decisions are made. I think it's going to be that kind of process.
So there's a change there. It goes from palms up, this is what I'm going to say, to it's going to be this, and there's more of a drive there, and he's moving forward. Now, this is because, and this is the biggest takeaway I think I'd love you all to take away from this hour, is that what you do with your body is going to affect your voice. Okay, gesture and voice is totally aligned. There was research done actually on politicians who, when they went to handshake each other, they'd always try to get their palm down when handshaking, because that was the idea that you had the power. If you were the person on top, literally of the handshake, you had the power. And you can hear that in people's voices. So the first thing is to say that when he actually uses his hands, then you can tell that his voice is emphasized if he does this, which means there is connection, which to an audience usually means you mean what you're saying, you're more connected to what you're saying. So he's matching up hand to voice, but also palms up versus palms down literally does affect the voice. So for example, if you did that exercise and you were like, oh, I'm so on the approachable side, like I really need to learn how to have more authority, how to have more gravitas, then I'm really going to encourage you to try to speak more with your palms down. So if everyone just tried saying the days of the week in your own time and you gesture with your palms down, it might sound something like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, versus palms up, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I automatically, if I try not to think about it too much, but I just think about connecting and doing what my hand is doing, I'm going to raise up as I come up, which means that that would be the more connection side. If you know that you're quite stiff and people are struggling to connect with you, or you're struggling to get out of autopilot or not feel so much like a robot, then actually, introducing a room and opening up the room with your palms up can be a beautiful way of actually including people in what you're doing. Versus if you wanted more authority, then we're going to go with palms down. And this is really important because I work with a lot of people who think, oh, in order to sound authoritative, I need to lower my pitch, because usually we associate lower pitch with men, and usually men have authority, and it's just this whole cycle of stuff. And yes, it might be true that your pitch lowers when you try to find more status. However, if you just think I need to lower my pitch, then that's just a very superficial way of getting into the work. Instead, why don't you make it easier for yourself? Why don't you make it true to you and actually use your body to help you get there rather than end gaming? So not only do we have palms down for more status, but there are a few other things we can think about in our alignment. So the next two kind of link together when it comes to alignment, and that is grounding the feet / the ruler archetype. Now, when I talk about grounding the feet, something we talk to actors about is what we call the tripod points, which is that on the ball of the foot, you want to imagine there is a point of contact with the floor in the ball of the foot underneath the big toe, ball of the foot underneath the little toe, and the heel. So it's kind of like you are always on all three of those points, and you almost want to imagine you're rooted into the floor. Very often we feel the need to, like I said, I want to influence you. I want to influence the person in front of me. Therefore, I'm going to lean forward and I'm going to sink to my hip and I'm just going to shrink myself or whatever it is. But forcing yourself to ground the feet is a really, really, really amazing way of just grounding your breath, grounding your pace, and making sure your voice is actually coming from the root of your body. Another way into that is what we call the ruler archetype, which is what we do with actors when they're playing a character of high status, like a king or a queen or a ruler. And we get them to walk around the space. And I say, okay, everyone walk around the space, explore the space. Now, as you're walking, I want you to imagine that on the right-hand side of you, there is a reflection of another body, another version of you. And on the left of you, there's another version of you. So you are actually 3 times the width that you actually are. You, as you sit here right now, just imagine what would happen if you imagine you were literally 3 times your width. How would you have to stand? How would you have to walk? How would you have to sit? Then I get them to imagine there's actually a mirror reflection of someone above you and a mirror reflection of someone below you. So not only are you 3 times the width, but you are 3 times the height. What would it be for you to take up space when you are there? And that can be a really powerful way of grounding the body. It's doing the same thing as the feet does. It's just a different way of looking at it. And also taking up space if you know you're someone who collapses. All of that also, for me, when I think of that ruler, I tend to sit back a little bit more, which is exactly the next cue, which is about sitting back into the spine. We're trying to counterpart this motion. And if any of you have worked with me before, you'll know that I always talk about the backward circle, which is when instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm on the forward circle, I need to get these people to impress me, I need to do this. Instead, we're actually going to literally do this with our hands. Remember, our body and our hands and our voice are connected. And I'm actually going to do backward circles, or you can do it to the side of yourself, and you can think about circling backwards and really sitting back into that spine. This motion means I'm not working for you to listen to me. You're just listening to me because I'm intriguing, because I don't need to fight for it. I can sit back into it. And it helps us feel a lot more confident as well. Other things to note here is when you are sitting into the spine, you can also imagine you're speaking from the back. A cue I like to use with a lot of people is, can you imagine there's a whole audience behind you? So even though I'm looking in the camera here, I'm going to imagine that actually I'm speaking to all of these people back there, and I'm really speaking behind me. I'm not thinking I need to project this way because this is going to tighten everything. But actually, I'm going to imagine all of these people are right behind me and I want them to listen. So I'm going to sit back even more and allow them to listen. Last thing, if you think you need to find more status, and this again is really helpful if you find that you're quite nervous, is trying to cut fillers or trying to, ums and ahs and things like that are kind of brutal when it comes to this. But something to think about is when you finish a thought, try to close your lips. Usually ums and ahs happen because I'll be going a million miles an hour, and then I won't close my mouth, and I have to use my mouth open, and I do this. Whereas actually, if you try to practice, when I finish a thought, I'm going to close the lips, and then I'm going to do another thought, and then I'm going to do another thought. And that's something to just think about if you think cutting fillers is if filler words and ums and ahs is a big reason why you sound more approachable. So if you want more status, we can practice gesturing downwards, grounding the feet, thinking about this ruler that you are, owning the space, sitting back into the spine, speaking from the back, and cutting fillers by closing the lips. Whereas for more connection, like I said, we can think about palms up. You can also think about focusing on relationship, not task. So when you have a small talk with a client or someone in the room, you can purposely start introducing, so how's your day been so far? How's your week been? Which you'd be surprised at the amount of people who don't think to do that. A lot of people just want to, a lot of people want to get onto the job and really prove to the people in front of them that they know what they're doing. But actually there is space for that. And then two of my favorite ones. The first one is vocal mirroring. So if you know that you are particularly stiff or you're particularly stressed and you really want to connect with someone on a level, maybe you're having a difficult conversation with someone. I would say all of these connection tips are actually really important when you're having a difficult conversation with someone in front of you, because if you're going to confront someone, they need to be seen and they need to be heard. So vocal mirroring, which is where literally if that someone goes, hi, yeah, I don't know how I feel today, you might answer with da, 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 and you're almost following their pitch, following their rhythm. And it feels very strange when you start to get to kind of consciously use it. But actually, we do that all the time. You probably all realize your voice changes ever so slightly when you speak to different people. Maybe your accent changes ever so slightly when you're in different social circles. So you are consciously or subconsciously always doing it, but doing it consciously when you really need to connect with someone can be a really nice thing to think about. And then the last thing on this is be fascinated, because unlike speaking from the back, which you can tell kind of has this register to my voice, if I'm fascinated by something, then suddenly, oh my gosh, that's fascinating. And I'm actually going to almost lighten my voice by doing that. In fact, sometimes I get people to go through their presentation and I just get them to go, da 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 da, it's fascinating, right? Da 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 da, it's so fascinating. Da 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 da, it's so fascinating, which can be brilliant when you are working on material that's really dry and really boring, and maybe material that you've done so many times. So trying to allow yourself to say, I'm fascinated by this, can really help. Again, we use that for actors all the time, because for actors, you're doing 8 shows a week. you know the script. Some actors are doing 8 shows a week for like 5+ years, but they have to every night make their material sound fresh. So adding an exercise like that's fascinating suddenly makes it feel and seem like it actually is the first time you're experiencing those words. So now that we've spoken a little bit about the self and about what we can control in regards to that, let's move on to the material, which in the acting world and philosophy is your actual script. So a lot of you may not have power over like actually what material you can use, but hopefully there are circumstances where you can affect at least the structure of what you are presenting or whatever you're here for. Even, these tactics can work if it's a really small thing. Maybe you're writing a whole script yourself, maybe it's a speech, maybe it's a presentation and you can't influence that. But we're going to be talking really about what you can do with something that's pre-written. If you were ever interested or curious about sort of the writing process, then you can send me an email or something after this and I can suggest some texts or maybe some videos that could be helpful. But for today, we're going to be focusing on what do you do when you have a script already done, you're happy with it, but how can we start to deliver it? So there's 3 steps to this section, which is 1, we're going to talk about finding your why. Number 2, we're going to talk about uniting and chunking it up. And then number 3 is actioning it, which this is one of my favorite things to teach. So I'm gassed to be talking through it with you all. So find your why. This is the first thing you need to do. Let's say you've written something. Let's say you've been sent a pitch deck that you need to present. You familiarize yourself with it. You understand and you're happy with the content. The first thing you need to then ask yourself is, what is my objective? And this is an overall objective. So this is linking this back to mastering influence. What influence do I want to have over the people in front of me? We've started with the self. We've started on figuring out what this is doing. Now it's time to bring in our scene partners or bring in our audience and go, okay, what is the best thing that someone can say, can do, can feel after I have presented this? What is my objective? And I'm going to get you to be really strict when I say it has to fit the sentence to blank, because all the time people will be like, oh, I'm just explaining something, but you can't to explain someone, right? Why are you explaining something? Are you educating? Because you can educate someone. Are you motivating? Because you can motivate someone. Are you trying to, distract? Because you can distract someone. Whatever it be, try to make it fit to someone else. And, it's give and takes, but the smaller you are or the more precise and concise you are about what your objective is, having that on the forefront is going to be really helpful for the next few exercises. So that's step 1. Step 2 is we unit and chunk it. So you might find that, okay, I've got my overall objective, but let's say my overall objective is to convince, okay? If I go into a 10-minute presentation with just trying to convince someone the whole 10 minutes, it might start to feel a bit dry. It might start to feel a bit phony. It might start to feel quite inauthentic. So this is where uniting comes in, because it's not just going to be one way you're convincing someone. It's going to be 3, 4, 5 ways, depending on how long it is that you're preparing for. So what we do is we get a monologue or we get a script and we literally draw lines, and I'm going to go through this in a second, where we feel there's a whole unit that started and a whole unit that's ended. And we ask ourselves, when trying to make these units, well, where is the energy changing? Like, where does it feel like I'm convincing? Where does it feel like I'm just humoring? Or where does it feel like I'm just welcoming them in? Where does it feel like I'm trying to encourage them or inspire them? Because there will be lots of feelings going on, and it's your job to start uniting that up. Maybe that occurs with a different energy. Maybe you want to see it as a different topic, or maybe you just want to see it as a different why. So after you figured out your overall, we're then going to chunk it up, and the chunks don't necessarily come with the paragraphs. They might be totally different ways. And then the third one is we're going to action it, which is a great thing to think about. So once you have your units, we're then going to come up with these mini whys. We have our overall why, we have our overall want or need, but then we're going to think of a mini one for every single section in this speech. And those mini whys are helpful when you think about, well, why are you still talking? And your answer is your mini why. So to put this into an example, this is like a general script I might say to a group when I'm introducing myself, okay, if I'm going in to do a talk or something like that. I've said that my overall objective in this introduction is to warm, okay? And what I mean by that is I want the audience to feel like they trust me. I want the audience to feel warm. I want them to feel like they're in good hands. So I've picked the sentence to warm. I'm going to read it through with no warmth in my voice, and then we're going to go through it and see what you think. So, hi everyone, I'm Molly, a voice coach and breathwork facilitator. I trained as an actor and later completed a master's in voice and accent coaching. I still work with actors, teach at Lambda, and collaborate with production companies like the BBC. I also work with groups and individuals, including CEOs and managing partners who often haven't had voice training. Our communication skills develop over time, often within environments not designed for oracy, impacting how connected we feel to our voices. This work involves training the body to form new habits. I can't change anyone's environment, but I can help you regulate your body, voice, and breath, showing that you don't need fixing, but perhaps a change in approach. For instance, I worked with a client who transitioned from a women's group at KPMG to a male-only team at EY. She felt out of place, but our goal was not to make her conform. Instead, we focused on helping her find her whole voice without altering her identity. This process is about ease and self-discovery, not adjustment. Now let's stand, take a second to scan the body and breathe in and sigh out 3 times and think about your intention for this session. So that might be a general script. Now, when I look at this script, I go, it's quite long, right? For just a short introduction. So I need to make sure that I've got little color and little shade. And when I'm nervous, when the human is nervous in general, it's really hard to make sure we have that light and shade in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unit it. And these are the units that I've picked. So I think this is the end of one unit because so far I'm talking about my credentials. I'm hopefully trying to explain to these people why I'm qualified to talk about this stuff. Then I kind of talk about what the work involves, and almost like I see that as my pedagogy or my teaching style section. It's not just the facts of who I am and what I do. It's a little bit deeper into the work I tried to provide. I then have a little story time or a little, client success or an example to kind of build on what I've done before. But I think that build needs like a different section on its own. And then I have like a really small unit right at the end, which is just, which is literally just an introduction into the work and asking them to start the exercise. So once we have that, I'm then going to think of my mini whys. So as I said at the beginning, I've written to convince, because I feel like I'm trying to convince the people in front of me within the first 20 seconds that I kind of know what I'm talking about and they haven't just found me and dragged me on board. Second one, I've said to invite. To me, this made sense because I think my pedagogy and teaching style seems quite inviting, especially if there are members who feel a bit nervous. And remember, all of these are going to link to my overall objective, which is to warm. But obviously, this is a very particular example. Yours can be literally any word. I've then said to build on to invite, I said to encourage when I include a client success or a story time. It feels like it's encouraging them that it works, encouraging them that I've had the experience before. And then I have to engage, which is a little bit of a U-turn, I feel like, from the rest of them, because to engage is suddenly like, okay, I'm done with what I have to say. Now I'm going to encourage you to do this. So those are my units and my mini whys. Yeah, they all link to my overall objective. My overall objective isn't getting anywhere, but it's helpful to start with your overall, then chunk it up, and then figure out what I want by each section. It's like they all work together to ultimately warm an audience. Now, that's how we break up the material. So now, how can we bring that to the work we've done on the self? How can we start to like tie these triangle or these 3 points together? And one of the things we could control that I'm going to focus on today is just gesture. I forgot how to say that, so I can gesture. So once you've done your why are you still talkings and your mini whys, we're going to talk about how the body can come in. Now this, you feel free to take a screenshot or a picture of this, because some of you may want to refer back to it, and there's loads of different versions online. So if you like this version, feel free to just take a snapshot of this. These are what we call the Laban efforts. And this is a very active thing that I won't spend too long talking about. However, what's important for you to know is there was a practitioner called Rudolf Laban who came up with physical efforts or physical actions that we're going to try out today. He associated each action with a different time. So it was either sustained, lengthened, or quick. A different space, which meant that every action is either direct, the action is going to one place, or the action is indirect and it's just going anywhere. And each action has a different weight, which means some are super light and some are really strong and heavy. Now, all of these actions are what we're going to start using to really add expression and really add intentional color, because it's one thing to say, you know, some people think they speak really monotone. Some people think they go up and down. Neither of them are necessarily a good tool to make an influence unless they're intentional. So we're going to start adding intentional color and expression by using these gestures in our mini whys. But first off, let's unpack this a little bit more. So let's play with what it is, like we saw in Obama's speech, to match body and voice, like we were doing the palms up and palms down. Let's start with something like a flick, okay? So what you're literally physically going to do is you're going to flick in the air, and it's just going to flick, 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 flick. Now we know from this, a flick is quick, so it has to flick quickly. A flick is indirect, which means I can flick anywhere, really, really anywhere, really, 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 really anywhere. But also a flick is light, which means I don't want to flick down there, but I want to flick up here. And this is a flick. And actually, I can flick anywhere. Now, it's interesting because different accents tend to follow different efforts. My mother is Irish, and she kind of speaks like that. Like everything my mother says in an Irish accent is almost like that, and that's the flick. So it's interesting to think about where your effort is in general and kind of compare it. But let's compare that, speaking like that, to something quite different. So let's look at pressing. Now, pressing is sustained, which means for a press, I'm going to press forwards, but it's going to be lengthened. I'm also direct with a press, which is different to the flick, right? Because I'm really pressing and I know where I'm pressing to. And then the third thing is a press feels strong. So it feels like it's in a heavier place in my voice versus the flick, which is just here, there, everywhere. So if we tried this line, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, and you tried to flick it a few times, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. You would literally rehearse your speech while doing this action. And you would rehearse your speech or each unit at least 3 times. And then once you've done it 3 times, you're going to take your hands away and you're just going to say, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. And you're almost going to embody like 10% of what you're actually doing. So don't be afraid to sound a bit like a Muppet and go for it when you're doing the physicality, because you're going to eventually obviously take that away and you're going to allow your voice to do the work. For example, I would naturally say Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, but if I thought about pressing and embodying 10% of the press, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. It's sustained, it's heavy, and it's direct, it feels. Which, as you can probably tell when hearing my voice, and for me, feeling that in my body, both of those tones are very different when you listen to them. One feels maybe more approachable, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, versus one feels a little bit more status-led or more credible, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, which is interesting, having a think about which actions allow which scale. So now, if I add this to my mini whys, all I'm going to do, and this is where it really can be subjective, is I'm going to think, okay, my first mini why is to convince. How does it feel when I convince / am convinced? To me, it feels heavy, it feels direct, and it feels sustained. So I'm going to put a press there. To invite, it still feels direct, like I want to specifically invite one person, not just random, but it feels lighter and it also feels a bit quicker. I said earlier that to encourage is almost building off of to invite. So I'm keeping the lightness and I'm keeping the quickness, But I'm going to relax a little bit. I'm going to make the story time feel really, really relaxed, because if I'm going to encourage someone, I want to really embody that approachability factor. And then to engage, I want to kind of do that U-turn that I talked about. And I want to ring, which might be heavier and a bit more sustained. So I'm not going to speak through all of it, but if you hear a little bit, I'm going to try now speak it through while embodying those different factors. And you can just close your eyes this time if you want, or you can read along with me and just see what you think. So I also work with groups and individuals, including CEOs and managing partners, who often haven't had voice training. Our communication skills develop over time, often within environments not designed for oracy, impacting how connected we feel to our voices. This work involves training the body to form new habits. I can't change anyone's environments, but I can help you regulate your body, voice, and breath, showing that you don't need fixing, but perhaps a change in approach. For instance, I worked with a client who transitioned from a women's group at KPMG to a male-only team at EY. She felt out of place, but our goal was not to make her conform. Instead, we focused on helping her find her whole voice without altering her identity. This process is about ease and self-discovery, not adjustment. Now, let's stand, take a second to scan your body, breathe in and sigh out 3 times, and think about your intention for the session. So perhaps you felt or heard slight changes in musicality through just thinking about those gestures. And I might do that one time and I might think, oh, I actually think the press was too heavy. I'm going to change the gesture to something that makes more sense. Or maybe you read it through and thought there needs to be another unit, or maybe there needs to be a longer unit. Whatever way, you do not know until you fully embody it. Okay, it's one thing to understand everything I'm saying up here, it's another thing to practice it. So promise me, try this in practice, do some mini whys and try it with a physical motion, and it's going to sound far more intentional. And if it's intentional and it affects you, then like I said, that's when influence comes in. Whatever affects you affects them as well. Them being the witnesses. So good time to move on to them. Now, this is the topic I'm not going to have as much time, and it's almost the hardest to talk about as a coach because it is so subjective. The biggest advice, which you would have heard from many, many people, is you need to think about who is the audience that I'm talking to. And you may have heard people, you know, you can put yourself in the audience's shoes. You can think about what their day has been. You can think about what they want. What does the listener want from this? You can think about how tired they would be. You can think about how engaged they would be. But what I'm going to introduce you today is what we call a cold or warm audience. And I love this because my partner's mum is a journalist for the BBC, and she talks about cold versus warm audiences. And she describes cold audiences as people who do not want you to succeed. Okay, so maybe you're standing up in a meeting and saying why you disagree with your colleague's choice of doing XYZ in the last quarter, and to which case your colleague probably isn't going to be super warm and super receptive to that. Or maybe they're a warm audience, which I'm sure all of you are, and most people I work with are, where you signed onto something and your audience want to learn something. They're eager to learn and they're eager to come in. And having this will affect your sort of foundational level of what your style is going to be. So, you know how earlier I said that Caroline's model of approachability and credibility, she kind of put right in the middle, this is where you want to be. Where I would argue that if you know you're going into a cold audience, you may want to help yourself out and go a little bit or lean into a little bit of the status credibility side, because chances are if it's a cold audience, you're going to be more nervous. You're probably going to speed up. You're probably going to freeze a little bit more, which means I'd like you to really practice something like the ruler or something like grounding or something like backward circle. Whereas if you're going into an audience where you know people want you to succeed, then it would be, I'll go back to that, really different. And you might want to be more approachable, and you may want to make sure that you're meeting them with their level and doing vocal mirroring. Similarly, linking this back to gestures, if you are going more credible, like I think I mentioned before, you want to pick efforts and actions that feel more credible, like feel like they match that ruler stereotype, which for me feels like something that's sustained and direct or quite strong, like a glide, like a press, like a ring, something that really feels like I'm actually embodying what my alignment is doing. And then with the warm audience, when you try to be more approachable in style, you might want to think about something a bit lighter, a little bit indirect, like I'm doing right now with my palms up. Maybe you want to think of a flick, you want to think of a slash, you want to think of a float, whatever it is, you can pick gestures. If you're looking at all of them and thinking that's so much, just start them all out, try what it feels like to do a sustain, do a direct, do an indirect, do a light or strong, and try to match that with your mini whys. Because maybe you have a speech where you want to, it could all be approachable, but you still want that variety in there, right? Like you really want to make sure you have at least 3 of these different efforts, because that is at least 3 different colors and tones in your voice. It could still be along the same path, like a float up here and a flick up here and a dab. It all sounds approachable, versus a press here and a ring here and a punch there. It all sounds more motivational or status led, but I'm still mixing it up. I'm not just going, I'm in my friendly mode now, I'm in my professional mode later. And that's why it's so important to think about that literal scale, because you can move up and down, and you should be able to move up and down super easily. It's not just one or the other. Neither is inherently good nor inherently bad. So last thing I'm going to end on is the reminder that I may have said to some of you before as well, when you're approaching this work, especially if you're thinking, oh my God, Molly, I feel so silly doing these actions, and what is that doing? And da, da, da. Remember, you have to be sincere, but never serious when it comes to this kind of stuff. Be open to the work, be receptive to the work, be receptive to your breath, to your voice, to all of that. But as soon as you go into a meeting or a communication and you think, God, I have to do really well at this, I have to take this so seriously, I really have to do my best, then that tightness and grip is really going to just stop any connection to your body, because you're going to go into a fight flight. Your body's going to shut down. It's not going to understand that you're in a safe mode to actually experience what you're saying. And if you're not experiencing what you're saying, if you're dissociated because you've taken it too seriously and you're not going to find any play or enjoyment from it, then you won't be affected because your body's shut down. If the self isn't affected, then the material cannot be connected to the self, which means that the witness can then not connect to them, which means that you're not necessarily in a place of mastering influence over other people or the material. You're just kind of going in that autopilot robotic feeling. So it's all linked together. And hopefully that method can just be something that is a useful kind of 3-tier method to think about. What is the self? Am I approachable? Am I credible? What can I affect? My gesture, my tone, how can I do that? All of the tools we've talked about. What is the material? How can I break that up? How can I unit it? What do I want? What's my why? And then finally, what's my witness? Are they cold? Are they warm? What are they going to want? And how can I try to use all my tools to meet them as well? Thank you so much again, team, for coming and for listening to me ramble. And thank you to those who are listening to the recording as well. I am going to, in fact, it's a good idea for me to do this now. I'm going to put some links in the chat if you want to leave any feedback. I would highly, highly, highly appreciate it. All of that is really useful. Otherwise, you can also just reach out to me. My details are here, so please do feel like you can do that as well. Here we go. But does anyone have any questions that you would like to put either into the chat or that you would like to just ask? Anything that anyone wants to unmute? Teresa, hi.
Hi there. I found this really fascinating. At first I thought, oh my God, well, to be fair, I'm going to re-looking at how I deliver stuff, definitely. But from what you've said, I've recognized also times when I have been more engaging, and it has depended on my body language and whether or not I felt comfortable. So that was just amazing. It's and it's also something that I think moving forward, I think you're aware that I'm putting together a program, and I think for senior leaders, particularly women, they do need to have that kind of this model delivered to them. So I might be tapping into you for that point of view. But I think I hadn't seen a couple of those models before, and I wouldn't have understood it had you not described them. So eloquently. So thank you very much. It's
Oh,
really
you're so
interesting.
welcome. You're so welcome. It's great to connect, and I'm glad. And what you're doing is really important, you know, because I'm very passionate about it. If anyone does work with me, I won't stop going on about it, how important it is to learn these, because we just aren't equipped with it, I don't think. I only know this stuff because I trained as an actor first. And I did a bit of debating and public speaking when I was younger, but nothing really was like this. It was all the performing arts training that I did. And then I kind of left that world, went into another world, and I realized, like, oh, there's a huge gap here. And I don't understand why there's not much link and accessibility. And a lot of the stuff, it does feel really scary, but it's stuff that only feels weird, I think, when it's understood on that visceral level. Like if you read it in a book and you understand it cerebrally, it does feel just strange compared to like the body actually picking something up. So anyway, all of that to say, great, you're doing good stuff, and I'm glad it made sense. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts or anything? You do not have to. Okay, beautiful. Well, hopefully you feel like you can reach out otherwise. Thank you again, team. It's lovely to connect with you all and everyone on the recording. I will actually stop the recording now in case anyone did want to ask me a question afterwards.